Well, you're not going to believe this. Now, if you've watched all the videos where people were talking about the weapon, and they go on in all of these videos trying to explore what possibly could have been the weapon used on Charlie, this particle beam weapon, to me, explains it all. And there's something that I had in my papers that I didn't even see, that I was going back through because I was going to put it all together in one video. And this part is something I didn't mention. The particle beam wound characteristics not only said that there was minimal surface trauma, the entrance might just be a tiny blackened spot. It didn't have to be tiny. But anyway, internal explosion. Now listen to this. The beam can cause a steam explosion, which I mentioned before, that somebody had a picture that caught, it looked like a puff of steam. They thought that it was something else. Listen to this. Internal explosion. The beam can cause a steam explosion or cavitation. That's what everybody's been talking about, is the cavitation that happened. It can cause cavitation deep inside the tissue where the particle energy is dumped. Even if the beam doesn't directly hit a vital organ, it can cause localized tissue death. No exit wound, which I mentioned before. If the beam's energy is lower than the required penetration depth, it stops inside, leaving no exit wound. That blows me away that word cavitation was used, because that's exactly what people had been saying, that there was cavitation. What caused it? Everybody wants to know what caused it. This is it. This is the weapon, I'm convinced. No exit wound. Charlie had no exit wound. Charlie had cavitation. The beam can cause the cavitation and steam explosion. And there was a picture of the steam at his neck and the cavitation deep inside the tissue where the particle energy is dumped. That is mind-blowing. And that's something to add to the last two videos. So I'm going to go through and try to say everything I said in those two videos together and tell you everything that I covered. I wrote down several points here. The first one is, there, with a particle beam weapon, there is an entrance wound with no exit wound. Exactly what Charlie had. There, I showed that it was a circular abrasion, that it can leave a burn spot where the beam hit. The body is hit by a shock wave. The body, head, face, neck is distorted and stretched by kinetic energy. The steam puff, which I just mentioned again, it also causes whiplash, and we saw Charlie's head go back and go to the side. One of the big things that just proved it to me that it was not a squib is that with this type of particle beam weapon, the blood turns from a liquid into a thick, coagulated, clotted mass. So when the blood came pouring out of Charlie, it was coagulated. It was thickened. It was like a chunky mass that came out. It was no longer a liquid. So it wasn't like normal blood. And that's why it was real blood. It wasn't a squib. It was this weapon that turned his blood into a coagulated, clotted mass that came out thickly. There were plastic shards, and one of these particle beam weapons that is used to destroy a drone blows the hole in the drone and causes shards, plastic shards. And there were shards in the SUV, and I think shards from Charlie's shirt. I talked about how Raytheon is using these laser weapons, the Hell weapons, and talked about how some of those ships that had the destroyer class had the Hell weapon on it near Lahaina. And I talked about how Fort Huachuca makes these laser weapons. So those are the main points I covered in the 2 videos. So let's quickly talk about what is a particle beam weapon. A particle beam weapon uses high-energy beam of atomic or subatomic particles to damage the target by disrupting its atomic and or molecular structure. A particle beam weapon is a type of space-based directed energy weapon which directs focused energy towards a target using atomic scale particles. Some particle beam weapons have potential practical applications such as anti-ballistic missile defense and detection systems. Well, you know, these things are being used in the Iron Dome. Trump commissioned us to have one of these systems here called the Golden Dome. They have been known by several names: particle accelerator guns, ion cannons, proton beams, lightning rays, ray guns, etc. The concept of particle beam weapons comes from sound scientific principles and experiments. One process is to simply overheat a target until it's no longer operational. However, after decades of research and development, particle beam weapons remain at the research stage, and it remains to be seen if or when they will be deployed as practical high-performance military weapons. Well, of course, Fort Huachuca is testing all of these types of laser weapons. Particle accelerators are well-developed technology used in scientific research, and they use electromagnetic fields to accelerate or direct charged particles along a predetermined path and a magnetic lens system to focus these streams on a target. The cathode ray tube in many 20th century televisions and computer monitors is a very simple type of particle accelerator. More powerful versions include synchrotrons and cyclotrons used in nuclear research. A particle beam weapon is a weaponized version of this technology. It accelerates charged particles, in most cases electrons, positrons, protons, or ionized atoms, but very advanced versions can accelerate other particles such as mercury nuclei to near light speed and then directs them towards a target. The particle's kinetic energy is imparted to matter in the target, inducing near instantaneous and catastrophic superheating at the surface, and when penetrating deeper, ionized effects can upset or destroy electronics. I talked about how the beam could be directed by a magnet, and there was a magnet on Charlie's shirt that the microphone clips to, and the microphone was destroyed. So this destroys electronics. So now we have added cavitation to the effects of this weapon. The cavitation deep inside the tissue where the particle energy is dumped, and we have no exit wound. If the beam's energy is lower than the required penetration depth, it stops inside, leaving no exit wound. The types of damage are thermal, the most common effect, where laser energy rapidly heats tissue, causing burns. Remember, I showed you that was an abrasion burn. Coagulation and clotting of the blood, and boiling of water creating steam. So this was not a squib. This was the blood actually turning from a liquid into a coagulated mass that's clotted and comes out clumpy. And that's why the blood looked so peculiar. That's why everybody thought it was a squib, because they didn't understand that his blood was literally turned from a liquid into a coagulated blood that came out thick. And that explains that to a T. I explained how the beam could be directed in a circular motion from a magnet. There was a magnet on his collar. And the beam causes damage and destroys electronics. Interestingly, Fort Huachuca works on electronic weapons. Okay, so yes, a particle beam weapon can create an entrance wound without an exit wound. The specific characteristics of such a wound include energy absorption. If the beam is turned into a specific energy level, it can be designed to penetrate to a certain depth and then dump its remaining kinetic energy. Remember, the cavitation is where the energy is dumped. And this says, and then dump its remaining kinetic energy, causing internal explosive damage or massive ionization without exiting, creating cavitation where this energy is dumped, which I didn't talk about before because I skipped it in my notes. And I had said that the kinetic energy is what caused the stretching in the neck and the distortion in the face and neck. It was the kinetic energy moving around in there, causing his whole stretching of the skin in the neck and the face. Now, there's something called the Bragg peak analogy, similar to proton therapy in medicine. Heavy particles like protons can be calibrated to deposit the majority of their energy at a specific depth, called the Bragg peak, effectively stopping inside the tissue. Now, isn't it interesting that they reported that the so-called bullet stopped and it was just under the skin? Because it wasn't a bullet. It was a particle beam weapon. The entrance characteristics. The entrance might appear as a small blackened spot, a scorched area, or a circular defect, which I told you looked very much like an abrasion. I showed the lady who had the abrasion under her lip there from having an impact from a fall. So it was an impact place of the beam going in that left this circular defect, scorched area. There's internal trauma. Rather than a clean exit, heavier ions tend to act more like lasers, causing superficial burns or deep penetration depending on power. Now remember, Baron Coleman showed burns on the hands and burns on the arms and had the theory of electrocution, which, by the way, my information says that the particle beam can cause electrocution. That's another fact. Neutral beams, these are designed to penetrate deeply, but can still be calibrated to stop within a target if the particle energy is controlled. Now, these other facts are the ones dealing with the kinetic energy. Yes, the kinetic energy from impacts, especially high velocity blunt force, which would have been what happened at the neck. So I told you that the distortion in Charlie's face and neck that we saw that was really strange. It almost looked like there was a bullet going all around up and through his head and through his neck. And everybody was like, whoa, what's that all about? Well, I believe it was the kinetic energy, which I talked about in the last two videos. Yes, the kinetic energy from impacts, especially high velocity blunt force, and that was a blunt force wound from the beam, significantly distorts facial and neck tissues, causing deformations like bruising and swelling, skull indentation, and severe internal damage as this energy transfers into the body's structures, leading to stretching and compression and disruption, while normal movement generates kinetic energy that our bodies manage. Trauma involves rapid energy transfer that exceeds tissue limits, deforming the face and neck. That's exactly what we see in the film footage when he's hit and his head goes back and we see all of this movement that looks like it's in the tissues. It's the kinetic energy bouncing all around. And the shock wave from being hit with the particle beam. How kinetic energy causes distortion, energy transfer. Kinetic energy is energy of motion. When a moving object hits the head or neck, this energy is rapidly transferred to the tissues. Tissue deformation. This energy causes elastic, temporary stretch and plastic permanent change, deformation, leading to bruising and swelling. Blood vessels break, causing blood to leak into surrounding tissues. skull indentation. The skull itself can deform under extreme force, creating indentations. So in the footage that we see, there is one frame where it showed the kinetic energy going through, stretching the skin in the neck and distorting the face and the neck, that it does look like there's some sort of indentation in his skull, in his head. And, you know, I don't want to show all of these clips of it happening, but you can clearly see the footage and probably have seen it a million times. Okay, there's muscle and soft tissue damage. Muscles, skin, and connective tissues are stretched, torn, or compressed. Pressure buildup and strains within the brain, called coup and contre-coup injuries. It causes neck strain, whiplash. Rapid acceleration can strain neck muscles and ligaments, sometimes causing whiplash. And we know that his head whipped back and over to the side, almost like, you know, it was no longer connected to his spine. That's what it looked like. But whiplash is one of the causes of this weapon. But I also wanted to state this about what goes on at Fort Huachuca. Is a hub for testing advanced military tech, including directed energy, lasers, and electronic warfare. But evidence points more towards testing laser microwave systems and command control communications, computers, cyber intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance tools rather than actual particle beam weapons, though related R&D, like neutral particle beam, has occurred historically, with current focus on integrating new tech like ArcNet for data sharing and testing directed energy for air defense counter-drone roles. And of course, Raytheon is over there in Israel as well, and they work on the Hell weapons that are on the destroyer ships that are the laser weapons. One of the things I asked on the internet is Israel using the laser weapons. The lasers have already been used to down threats, Israeli officials said in May of 2025. Other industry partners include Elbit Systems, which is responsible for the laser source, as well as other defensive industries, including SCD and Shafir Systems, according to the release. So now I've just proved to you even more points of what this particle beam weapon does, and that it does cause cavitation, added to all the other information that I gave you, which just blows me away that I had that in my notes, but I had skipped over it, that it's one of the effects of this weapon. So how can there be any doubt what the weapon was that was used on him? I mean, what other weapon? There's no rifle that is going to cause the stretching of the skin and the kinetic energy that it looked like something was poking this way and that way inside. That was the stretching, that was the kinetic energy. I'm convinced of it. And you now have more points than ever that this was the weapon used to assassinate Charlie Kirk. And as I said before, with JFK, it definitely was a rifle, because you saw pieces of explosive flesh come out with a mist cloud of, you know, blood and matter. But with Charlie Kirk, that there was no blood and matter, because the particle beam weapon scorched and then went inside and destroyed the tissues and dumped the kinetic energy inside, causing it all to move around, distorting his face and stretching his neck and face, and then causing the whiplash, and what else? Causing burns, possible electrocution with that weapon, and destroying the electronics, the microphone. I mean, every bit of this fits with this type of weapon used to eliminate Charlie Kirk. And may God reveal all of the truth so the truth can come out and justice will be done and served. I pray this in Jesus' name, that the truth will prevail and that the enemy will be destroyed, because clearly This was done to shut him up. And I'm not going to get into the politics of all of what he believed and all of that. But I'm just trying to show you that the Lord was putting this in my heart about that this was the type of weapon that was used. And so when I started researching this type of weapon, every detail fits. When you research a rifle, none of the details fit. Absolutely none of them. So I'm convinced that I have solved this weapon. But God always outsmarts evildoers. So I'll leave you with this to think about. Comment below. I just wanted to add that other part that I had left out about the weapon causing cavitation too, which was a big point in all of the videos I've seen about what happened. So if you like this video, please support this channel. Thank you very much. It's paypal.me/KKROCOCO. And please read my book about revealing things about Jesus for the last days, the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, in the Almond Tree, Aaron's Rod, the Messiah, King of Israel by Kimberly K. Ballard. Acquired at Harvard University Library through a Judaica endowment of all things. I didn't have anything to do with that. The Lord put it there through that endowment. And it's extremely thrilling. And it's available at olivepresspublisher.com and all the online bookstores. However, please get it from my publisher because they give us proceeds. The other places really don't. So there you have it, and I'll see you later. I think this is incredible. And if you want to share this with a congressman, share my video, please. Somebody said that they would do that. I don't know why it's not printing a transcript or whatever of what I'm saying or a summary. I didn't really have any control over that, although I am not really savvy at some of the settings on here, and I really hope that I can get somebody to help me with that in the future. This is unbelievable, you guys. Unbelievable. And especially not being a weapons expert, to find every detail that fits is extraordinary. It can't be a coincidence. I'll see you guys. Good night, everybody.